In the past 3 months, 4 godly men who have made a huge difference in our society have passed away. And it leaves us with this difficulty. How will we fill the shoes of these men? It will take at least multiple men to make up the difference for just one of these men. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we wonder how it can be done. But there's also something else that happened in the wake of their death, and that is that not just a few people rejoiced over the death of these innocent, godly Christian men and fathers. What can cure a society so bent on demonic hatred that it would do such a thing? Well, it may be a hard pill to swallow, but it's one we need to take, and I'll talk about it today on Indie Thinker. My name is Reed Uberman. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you haven't seen the show before in the past, I like to give Christian commentary on cultural events because we're living in an age of bad ideas, and the only cure for bad ideas are good ideas, and the best ideas are found in God's Word. I think we're seeing that all the time, but if you need some more evidence, today's show will try to provide reasonable evidence for that very proposition. So if you haven't seen the show in the past, I also must mention today's show sponsor, who is our good friends over at Sweet and Savory. Maybe you've heard this ad before. If you have, and you haven't booked your classroom experience with them, then what are you waiting for? But maybe some of you just need an extra incentive to know that if you're looking for an online or in-person cooking class experience, Sweet and Savory is the place for you. They can teach you to make some of the most amazing food in a fun and faith-friendly environment. So this Christian company is worth every bit of your time and your money. If you want to support the things that truly matter, you need to support businesses like Sweet and Savory. And if you're not in the classroom area, you can go online and look at all of their online classes, which you can stream from your home. But if you are, you need to book a date night, a group event, maybe a private outing with your employees. And you need to go to their calendar and see all the upcoming classroom experiences that are happening in your area. To do all of that, you need to go to sweetandsavoryclassroom.com, and when you check out, use the promo code IndieThinker to let them know that we sent you. Now, what's an undeniable fact of the Old Testament is that the greatest enemy of the people of God was never really Egypt. It was never Moab. It wasn't the Canaanites and the Philistines. It wasn't any of those people. Sure, there were many battles that needed to be fought with each and every one of those people, but the real enemy of Israel was always Israel, because idolatry was the thing that deteriorated them from the inside out. In other words, they were their own worst enemy, and I think we can sympathize and maybe even we can kind of relate to that thing in our own society today, because I believe that if we are going to see the destruction of this great nation, it will happen not because of foreign enemies, but domestic. And what I simply mean by that is that if we fail to understand how important it is that we have a religious and moral underpinning in society, we will totally disintegrate this society. Now, this is not just me saying this. This is people like Nietzsche, who in his book on the genealogy of morals and beyond good and evil wrote things like, when a society delights in cruelty, resentment, or slave morality, it corrodes social bonds and human flourishing. Now, Nietzsche believed that slave morality was things like meekness and humility. Those are things that we shouldn't possess in our moral framework. So, of course, Nietzsche is a God-hating atheist, and he was wrong about many things. But the general principle that he tries to express is just simply this, that it is corrosive to a society not to have morality. We need to go a little bit deeper to see where that morality comes from, and that's why we need to go to the founders of our nation, like George Washington, who said this: of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. In other words, the pillars that support this great nation are built upon religion and morality. And of course, we all know the religion he's speaking of here. It is the Christian religion. Samuel Adams put a fine point on it when he said this. And he said this in a letter to James Warren in 1779. A general dissolution of principles and manners will more surely overthrow the liberties of America than the whole force of the common enemy. In other words, say if we had a group of people that were cheering on the death of innocent men, and they were largely found on one side of the political aisle and made up a large portion of that group of people. Maybe even say you had a group of Democrats in the House who refused to honor the death of a Christian martyr because of their demonic hatred for that individual.
And AOC just voted no.
If that were to happen, it would slowly but surely disintegrate a society. So when there are people cheering on the death of godly, innocent men who have done good things to shape our nation for the better, how can we survive as a nation? How can you unify as a nation? How can you see eye to eye? How can we continue to claim multiculturalism and a multi-ideological hodgepodge melting pot in society is good for all of us? I think we're starting to see that we may be many and that may be good, but out of many we must become one. We must have something that holds us together. This is what Hobbes was talking about in his book Leviathan when he develops the idea of social contract theory. In other words, that we must have even a loose set of principles that are either implied or explicitly accepted that binds us together. A set of morals, a set of principles that hold a society together are the only way to hold a society together. And we're seeing how quickly that is unraveling in the present when we can't even define what a woman is. When the people who claim that masculinity can be very toxic, but then cheer on the brutal beating of a woman by a man in a UFC arena. How is it possible that we can truly hold our society together when the law of non-contradiction is constantly being violated? And again, we have people who are celebrating the death of godly men. Now, you probably don't need much evidence for this, but I believe this is a proposition that needs to be supported. So do we truly have a group of people, large groups of people, who are cheering on the death of godly, innocent men? And the answer to that is yes. So for evidence, I will give you here Kristen Hawkins speaking to a group of students, not online, but in person, who are celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk.
Do you think he deserved an assassination?
Bro, he was a Nazi. That's not a good conversation.
That's actually not true.
I'm just
What's
gonna
the
say
proof
something.
that Charlie was a Nazi?
That he advocated for the death of trans and gay people. He advocated
No,
for the
he
death
did
of...
not. That's actually been disproven multiple times.
Okay,
if
that's
you
not the
actually look
conversation
up
that
the
I
clip.
came to
Okay,
have with
because you
you.
can't defend it. Okay.
No, it's because I don't want
Say
to defend
something
it.
terrible about somebody who is just assassinating. Why can't you just say that
Because he was a Nazi.
disagree? So you think he got what he deserved?
Yeah. Yeah. Hi to the camera. Hi to the camera.
Do you hear what you're saying?
Yeah, I do.
You just said a father of two.
Oh my God,
got what
oh
he
my God,
deserved.
oh my God, a father of two. He wanted his child to carry a baby if they got... Wait, no, look at me. No, look at me. Look at me. Look at me.
Oh, I'll look at you.
He said that if his 9-year-old daughter got raped, he would make her carry that baby to term. Is that something you agree with?
Yes. My daughter got raped. The most unimaginable tragedy I can imagine. I don't think sexual assault and the conception of a new human being justifies killing the human being. In the womb.
Okay, that's great. That's wonderful.
Well, you just said that my friend got what he deserved. I want you to back that up.
Yeah, because he
When
was
did
a
that-
Nazi who was advocating for violence, bro.
He's not a Nazi. He never advocated for violence. That is purely
He never
false.
advocated for violence.
No.
Now, what I love there is the shock on the face of this young girl when Kristen Hawkins suggests that maybe you shouldn't kill babies, but the absolute glee on not just her face, but others behind her when they celebrate the death of Charlie Kirk. It's almost like one side of the political aisle celebrates the mass slaughter of human life and doesn't really have an understanding of life made in the image of God and that it is holy.
Yep.
But we should not be surprised that an advocate for womb lynching advocates for the death of Charlie Kirk. This is the problem. How can we unify with a group of people who do not hold life as precious and valuable? If you'll go around calling your enemies fascist and Nazis, it is because you mean to dehumanize them so that you can celebrate their death or at least be responsible for it. Now, also, we need to speak about the death of a couple of godly men who were also cheered when they died, and that is John MacArthur and that is James Dobson. James Dobson was the founder of Focus on the Family, who's a ministry that really revolutionized our world and really did kind of create the space for people like Charlie Kirk and others to come along and do what they do. The conservative movement really is built upon some of the work of James Dobson and others in our society today. But there were a group of people who celebrated both the death of John MacArthur and James Dobson because they happened pretty close to each other. And I want to read an article that was syndicated by Yahoo News. So again, not some small article, but a very large news media organization that syndicated this column from The Advocate. And the headline says this: "While John MacArthur and Jimmy Swaggart welcomed James Dobson to hell, their bigoted legacy on earth lives on." Before I read any more of this article, first thing I have to mention to you is that when anybody calls you a bigot, a transphobe, homophobe, or any of these other kind of ad hominem attacks, they call you a Christian nationalist, let's say, do not fall for the tactic. Do not listen to a single thing they say. Do not worry about your reputation, because these people mean to try to shut you up rather than to actually be honest and have a sincere dialogue. And these are not the kind of people that you should defer to. So get rid of your fear, if you haven't already, of being called names, and wade ahead, Christian soldier, into the truth, because you'll see how quickly tolerance and inclusivity and acceptance flies away from the LGBTQ community the moment somebody slightly disagrees with them. And that's what you'll see in this article. John Casey writes, "Last week, hell gained another one. James Dobson, once one of the most powerful evangelicals in America, died. For decades, he wrapped his focus on the family empire and the language of values, but the actual gospel he espoused was detestation. He peddled conversion therapy, a grotesque form of psychological torture that has left countless LGBTQ people scarred for life." Now, I don't know if I should point out the irony to you here or not, but I can't help myself. So James Dobson left people scarred for life, but not people in the trans cult. Well, maybe you get the point. The article goes on. "I've talked to several people who went through this process." Now, by the way, when he says he's talked with several people, he means he talked with one dude who was a friend and said that it was the most horrific experience that they've ever gone through in their life. And of course, conversion therapy can be perhaps a bad practice in some ways, depending upon what they do. But by and large, conversion therapy to people like John, who's writing this article, is anything that a pastor may do to try to persuade another individual that homosexuality actually doesn't lead to the act of human flourishing, that it's actually not really that good for you. You know, that could be reminding people that actually you put yourself at risk for a high degree of colon cancer if you engage in the S word, and not the, the normative S word, but the, maybe you get the point. Anyway, or if you tell them, hey, God didn't make the exit hole to be the entrance hole, those kind of things. You engage in any kind of logical, biological conversation. Maybe you say, hey, we're in catastrophic birth rate decline. Maybe we shouldn't wish that a large group of Americans enter into fruitless and non-reproductive relationships. Perhaps we could mention all of those things, and any bit of that simple facts is considered conversion therapy. But he goes on and he says each one contemplated offing themselves. I think that's why Dobson endorsed it so fervently. At the end of the day, he wanted our community wiped off the planet. Well, we're still here, James, and you're not. Now, again, I have to make mention of the fact that the moment we talk about the LGBTQ community, the first thing that comes to mind is preferred pronouns and being courteous to others. And does it really hurt you that much just to say he to a she or she to a he and just be kind to other people? Does it really hurt you that much, Christians, to be kind to others? Well, lying to people isn't a courtesy to them, as always. And I noticed that tolerance and courtesy and respect and caring about others is not something you guys do very well. In fact, the vast majority of you act like this guy writing this article. You are happy that James Dobson is dead simply because he disagreed with you. And this is something that is not uncommon. This writer, if you want to call him that, will continue to go on and talk about John MacArthur, and he'll say things like this. James Dobson's death followed the passing earlier this summer of another despot in the name of Jesus, John MacArthur, who was a ferocious enemy of the LGBTQ community. He was a man who spent his long career spitting venom. So I hope you understand by now that the writer here is using code. When he says spitting venom, what he actually means is that John MacArthur disagreed with him, and that's spitting venom to him. But also he means that John MacArthur just simply believed in biblical sexuality, like Christians who have gone before him and for thousands of years have believed. That we believe that a man should be with a woman and a woman with a man, and that you cannot reinvent human sexuality. And if you do, it will actually be bad for society. Now, the Alphabet Club tells us that they're inclusive and they're welcoming and accepting. So forgive me if after this article, I do not believe you at all and never really did in the first place. Because you guys have shown yourself yet again that you're a rabid death cult that hates Christianity. You're not interested in tolerance, and you're not interested in acceptance, and you're not interested in having conversations. You showed that with Charlie, and you continue to show it over and over and over again. Because if we're going to have the real conversation, let's be honest and say that we should not tolerate everything. There are some views that should be intolerable. And the real question then, therefore, is which ones? And who has the right to say that? Well, I just happen to think a holy God who knows better than each and every one of us is the one who has the right to tell us what not to do. Whereas you just think you should be able to do whatever you want to do for any reason at any time, and anybody who disagrees with you, well, should be offed. So I see the hypocrisy in your argument, and I raise you Jesus because we desperately need him. And we had him in the form of a guy named Voddie Baucham. And the left would be rejoicing all over the place with his death if they actually really knew him more. But he certainly was one of the most powerful cultural influences in the Christian faith at this time as a theologian and a prolific author. And I guarantee you, if the left did know him a little bit better, they would be rejoicing more, as I said, because he said things like this.
This idea of guilt and innocence being inherited. This idea that because of who your parents were, you've inherited guilt or you've inherited innocence. That white people can't not be racist and black people can't be racist. Yeah, because the modern definition of racism, prejudice plus power. What's the power? The power is the cultural hegemony. If you are not part of the cultural hegemony, then you technically can't be a racist. How about that? How about that? So a predominantly white church that doesn't have black members is in sin, but a predominantly black church that doesn't have white members is, it just is. One of those groups needs to repent and sackcloth and ashes, and the other, there's nothing wrong.
Whoops. There he is blowing up the BLM narrative and blowing up the Marxist racial narrative that really racism is just a stand-in word for power. So anybody that might have a benefit in this life, even if they worked really hard to get it, it must be that somehow their power and privilege came as a result of systemic racism. It's really just a way of trying to wrench power from the people who earned it and give it to the people who did not earn it so that they can revolutionize society. And this is why DEI deserves to be gotten rid of completely. But Voddie didn't stop there, because Voddie was really good at speaking about the gay agenda and how the gay agenda tried to hitch their wagon to the civil rights agenda. And he wrote a whole book about it called It's Not Like Being Black. And maybe from the title, you can guess that that whole book is about the fact that homosexuality is a mutable sexual preference, and being black is something that is immutable. In other words, you cannot change it. So you cannot discriminate on the basis of race, but you can discriminate on the basis of an idea that you choose. And we can vet those ideas, and we can judge those ideas, and we can weigh those ideas for their moral worth. But obviously, activists would never want to engage in such a conversation because they know that their ideas would fall apart at the slightest push. And that's really why people rejoiced over the death of these godly men. So I hope you can see, yes, indeed, there is a large group of people that is so riddled with demonic hatred that desperately needs a solution to their depressing and godless nihilism. And I think I have a cure. Because in the Bible, there was a culture that cried out for Barabbas instead of calling out for the author of life, Jesus. And the only answer for that culture is the answer for our death-obsessed culture today. And that is the Great Commission. See, Jesus sent out his disciples to go spread the word even further and wider than he did in his own lifetime as a response to a culture hell-bent on destruction. The whole answer here is we must pursue revival for this nation before it's too late. We must shine lights in dark places. We cannot just merely settle for Christless conservatism. That's a political philosophy, and it will never truly bring about God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We must do more than that. We must preach Jesus, and we must preach him loud. We must encourage every single Christian that is still hiding behind the veneer of politics, not mixing with religion. We must destroy that dichotomy and realize that God is the God of everything, and there is no square inch under heaven where Jesus Christ does not shout mine. And if so, then we must do everything we can to make sure that God's word is heard and heeded wherever we go and as much as we can in our society. And if not, I fear the worst. But like in Jesus' day, I believe for the best, because there is hope. As long as Christ is on the throne, and as long as his mercy is extended to this nation, we can still turn from our wicked ways and see better days ahead, not only for ourselves, but also for our children. All right, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if this show is beneficial to you, you'll love becoming a member over at indiethinker.org/support, where you can take your indie thinking journey from a Christian perspective to the next level. You can gain access to exclusive books, movies, documentaries, and so much more. So go to indiethinker.org/support to sign up. Don't forget to check out the sponsors down below in the description of this podcast. But most importantly, go with God.